Before we get into my thoughts, and I wouldn't call it a counter, but certainly a different viewpoint of where we are today as a state and what this budget does, I do want to thank the chairs of the Money Committee and the ranking members as well for the hard work. Chairman Walker and Chairman Rojas, I know Tony, so many people look up to you in our caucus. So many people who work with me and Joe and our staffs look up to you. You know the budget about as well as anybody has ever known it in the state of Connecticut. And your passion and your dedication to it is truly stunning. And I know it takes a lot of long hours. And you have always done it with your head held high and treating everybody with respect. And it's really quite a skill. And to the chair of the Finance Committee, you know, Jason, you have become an expert in almost all policy issues that you address, and one of the more complicated sections of law that exist in our general statutes. Anyone can ask you a question from across the aisle in our caucus, and you will answer it with composure, calmness, and accuracy. And to the ranking members as well, on the other side of the aisle, I know you put a lot of time in as well, and I know your questions are not meant to be gotcha questions. You're doing your due diligence for your constituents, and we appreciate that. I'm just confused. I am generally perplexed at what has gone on, not tonight, because tonight is a microcosm of where we got from last November. And when I think about what we did in 2017 and 18, I'm further perplexed. But most of the comments from the other side of the aisle just don't square with reality and don't square with what has occurred. So I got to go back on that. You can't be loud all night like a motorbike, and the only thing you bring to a budget fight is amendments. This budget invests. So what do I mean by investing? I've heard a lot about spending. The Minority Leader mentioned it. We have a spending cap now, a constitutional spending cap. Now, I know there's a lot of new members who might go, what? A spending cap? This is not a town council. It's not a board of selectmen. We have a constitutional spending cap that OFA verifies. So all of our spending is subject to a constitutional spending cap that we cannot override by a vote of a legislature. So maybe the spending was, you wanted it lower, but you can't say that there was just unlimited spending, because you can't by the Constitution of the state of Connecticut. But within those constraints, Mr. Speaker, we found a way to invest. We found a way to invest in our nursing homes so there's not a strike for those workers. Can you imagine what would have happened if we had a strike in those nursing homes? It actually would cost more to have the strike, $1 million a day, than to fund what we did. Can you imagine the disruption in those homes? We funded our towns. I would imagine every single town who put their budget together is doing better. The towns of Eastern Connecticut, look at those number runs, the investment in those towns that they're getting compared to previous years. The ECS funding was a bipartisan formula. It's not a Democratic formula. We kept it. Teacher pension, no cost shift. So someone said property taxes are going to rise. Call your board, call your director of finance. They're going to look at you and go, that works for our town. As a matter of fact, I haven't heard one person from CCM and cost say, I'm against the budget. Not one email, not one call, nothing. So don't say property taxes are going to rise because it's a good talking point. Back it up with facts. BPRC funding for programs for the urban cities. It's not pork. It's not a sweetener for anybody. It is so true what people say about the lack of programs and resources in urban environments. The difference between a little league in a certain suburban town where you can do a fundraiser and raise $100K, or you can do a night event where you have raffle tickets and prizes, is a stark contrast to what you see in other places. Do you know in the city of Hartford right now, if one of our football teams makes a state playoff, they can't play a home game. They don't have a regulation field. You could say, well, that's not my problem. That's not the highest priority for the city of Hartford. But if 30 high school kids go out and make a state playoff game, they have to travel on the road. In some communities across the state, the high school playoff game is the most celebrated event of your year. Tens of thousands of people want to be part of it. Thousands go to the game. And in Hartford, they can't even play a home game. They get bused to Middletown. Investing in programming, investing in people, investing in individuals is not pork, and it's all done within a constitutional spending cap. Expanding Husky Aid Medicaid coverage by 4,000 people. Is that a bad thing for the state of Connecticut? No. Daycare, school readiness, local health networks, all things that everybody thinks are important. But if you're going to prioritize these spending things, you have to balance the other side of the ledger. But I don't want to hear about wasteful spending. I really don't. Particularly when I have nothing to counter and contrast it with. A bunch of amendments a budget does not make. So you can't sit here and say, well, you guys did X, Y, and Z, that's terrible, I'm voting no. What was your alternative? What did you propose? What was your option? That's what a legislator is supposed to do. To go through an entire winter and an entire spring, and we're almost upon summer, with no budget document is shocking. It's disrespectful to the taxpayers of the state of Connecticut. You talked about public hearings. You filed 6 amendments that had no public hearings. I didn't get a fiscal note on half of them when they were ready because they weren't even ready on the system. That is not a budget. Stabilization is the second key part of our budget. I talked about investment under the constitutional spending cap. Let's talk about stabilizing. The teacher pension fund has been brought up. It has confounded legislatures for a long time. Not because of anyone in this room. We all agree on that. Nobody created that problem. But if there's a sympathetic class of persons in the state of Connecticut, can we all agree it's our teachers? Can we agree it's Mrs. Smith and Mr. Smith who teach kindergarten class? I think we can agree on that. We have to figure it out. If we do nothing, we're looking at a cliff of $3 or $4 billion in 3 years, which would consume almost 25% of 1 year of the biennium budget. It is not realistic. You cannot do it. You couldn't afford it. There's nothing. You couldn't cut, you couldn't tax, you could do nothing. The Treasurer's Office came up with an interesting way to restructure it. It required taking $400 million, $380, from the surplus, which was not spent, and putting it into a scarf reserve fund, which will return to the rainy day fund around 2030. Not spent. Put into the rainy day fund, so that businesses have the predictability and the stability they need, because that is a looming problem. All of the commissions we've had, and man, we've had a lot of commissions, talked about the teacher pension problem. This solves it and smooths it out. That's not a bad thing. It's stabilizing it for our large and small businesses to have predictability. The hospitals, I'm just confused. The hospital tax, which was part of the bipartisan budget, carried over to this year, and they finally have reached an agreement. We use the remainder of the surplus funds to, and I got to be careful because I know they're still negotiating it, but generally speaking, to help settle that issue. So I ask everyone in this chamber, we'll be back in special session. Are you going to approve the hospital settlement that they want us to approve? Some of the best job creators in the state of Connecticut can't outsource hospitals. No, you can't. So who's going to vote for that? You got to step up, you got to appropriate money. Who's going to step up and say, I'm going to appropriate funds to reach a global settlement with our hospitals, our major employers? I'm going to. It's a hard vote. There's a lot of things you could do with that money, but it's the right thing to do, and it also takes off another big issue. The hospital lawsuit and the teacher pension are the two things that if you're looking to invest in Connecticut or grow in Connecticut, you go, this is going to be a problem. And just like that, with great work from the governor's office and this legislature, they're gone. They are structured, they are predictable, and those large costs are gone. Then, people are angry at us for destabilizing with the business entity tax, the pass-through. We didn't destabilize anything. Then it was talked about the payroll tax commission. We didn't cause that disruption. Donald Trump and the Republicans in D.C. changed the entire tax code to screw Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey. So we have to find responses to that. I'm not lying. It's the truth. So Connecticut got handed a whole new federal tax code that absolutely punished our taxpayers. The payroll tax commission would not raise taxes on anybody. It would lower them. It is looking to find an exemption to the crazy federal laws that were passed to punish New England. So you're going to vote against that, the commission, the study of it? Why? Go ask a lot. Business people have said, we have to study it. It may not work. We didn't destabilize the tax code in Connecticut. We are responding to the SALT issue. The business entity tax, the pass-through, was put in for the same reason, to work around it. And that benefit is still accruing in a much larger way than it would have otherwise. Yes, we're taking part of that credit back. But to say that's destabilizing, no. Everything we're doing is a response to what happened in Washington, D.C. So if folks don't like that, go run for Congress. Go take it up with them. But Connecticut is not doing well by it. The third part of our budget is preparation. What do I mean by that? People say we spend too much, we're under the spending cap. People say we borrow too much, we have a bond cap. And by the way, the governor will still pick the projects that he wants. There's many assumptions. As we all know, he has a huge role to play after we get out of here. It's the rainy day fund. When I got here, it was $0 when we were done with the budget. I mean, it's shocking. Can you imagine in your own house if you had no money left in an account somewhere for savings, you had $0? And there are many families in Connecticut, that's reality. That's living paycheck to paycheck. That is one bad decision or one bad incident happening from altering your life. The state was in the same position. A wealthy state like Connecticut, we didn't have a dollar. With this biennium budget, despite all the rhetoric and noise about overspending, we could have a $2.8 billion rainy day fund. It'll be $2 billion on September 30th, and it could be as high as $2.8 billion. The largest in the history of the state of Connecticut. Go back to the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the golden times, the bad times, the highest rainy day fund in the state of Connecticut, to prepare for the inevitable bad times, which is something that none of us got the advantage of. We could have done a lot of things with that funding. We didn't. There was discipline in this budget, and that discipline was to keep the rainy day fund where it should be. And why does that matter beyond having that for the tough times that are ahead, that are always going to occur? Because every time we borrow money, it's cheaper. A better credit rating is a positive thing. So, we've invested, we have stabilized, and we have prepared. And all I've heard today was I would do something better or different. And I cannot say how many times this side of the aisle has offered to negotiate bills. We had 2 bills this week where the ranking member and the chair went in the back room and negotiated a bill. In 2017, we negotiated a budget. In 2018, we negotiated a budget. Speaker and I, chair people of the committees, took hits for that. So did you guys. But we all came together and said, we can make it work, it's better for the state. And we're seeing some of the benefits of that. But this year, I'm not saying we were going to get together. Maybe politics changes that after a while, and I understand that. But not a budget. So what do you want us to negotiate with? An amendment filed on June 3rd at 7 o'clock at night? That's what we're negotiating with? If you're going to be serious about the budget, if it's such a crisis, if the world is ending, how do you not propose a budget? At least a term sheet. When you don't propose a budget, you cede your authority to other people. You punt your ability to make difficult decisions. Voters can forgive disagreements. They cannot forgive inaction. Mr. Speaker, I strongly support this budget, and I look forward to supporting it tonight. Thank you very much.